Hi, my name is Amy Heisek, and I'm the Wellness Coordinator for the New York State PTA.
Hi, I'm Christina Arroyo Rodriguez, and I am the Juvenile Protection Specialist for New York State PTA.
We're here for our legislative summit to go through one of the asks, one of the issues that we are advocating for. This issue and this ask is about digital and tech equity. So we're here to explain and go through with you what the issue is, why it's important for us to advocate for this issue. So the executive budget for this year includes a bunch of initiatives to support the expansion of high quality, low cost, and affordable broadband access for families, especially rural broadband grants and digital equity programs. Our rural areas aren't ones that we normally consider. We normally consider issues about access to broadband in big cities and having it be a socioeconomic issue, access that way, but rural areas actually have access with getting broadband to be installed or having availability of broadband. So that is definitely a consideration. So the expansion of that is very important to our rural families as well. And New York State PTA definitely supports these proposals and having these proposals passed.
Yes. We also need to support free access to broadband for all low-income, high-need New York State families and continued tech and digital equity initiatives. And this is the part where the equity part takes place. A lot of students already have access. A lot of students already have these technologies. However, we want to take care of all our students. So those that don't, we want to be there to support them.
Absolutely. So the reason that we need these, the pandemic definitely brought a lot of these equity issues to light. They had existed before the pandemic, but it became so much more a critical piece, especially for education. We are definitely concerned, we as New York State PTA are concerned with the lack of broadband access in a lot of communities and the lack of devices that students have access to.
And according to survey data from the New York State Education Department, more than 215,000 New York State students do not have access to a computer, Chromebook, or tablet to use for their instruction in their schools. And 165,000 students lack internet access to fully participate in either home, remote instruction and learning, or just distance learning. And while we have seen these numbers improve, I'm not going to say post-pandemic, but as the pandemic has taken its course, the numbers are still not 100% of having these technologies and these opportunities. So until every child has both access and a device capable of connection, we have work to do.
And while the pandemic is definitely waning, thankfully, and the concern of having long periods of remote instruction or long periods of having students learning at home or from home, while that is less of a concern now, and schools are back to in-person learning and we are going to stay there, Lord willing. So we're doing all the best that we can to make sure that happens. But all of the technologies that did start to be in use during the pandemic and while remote instruction was happening for so those long stretches of time, those tools that teachers now have access to, that schools now have access to, those aren't going to just go away because we are back to in-person learning. Some of those tools and some of those technologies are phenomenal teaching tools. And so teachers have now incorporated those into their instruction that are also now being used while we are in-person instruction. So just because we are in person doesn't mean that the tech and the equity piece is on the back burner. This is still an issue. This is still going to be a continuing and ongoing issue that we need to make sure that we advocate for. So the eLearn Fund is really what we are looking into and asking people to support. We fully support the Senate Bill 3184 and the Assembly Bill 5180. And what this eLearn Fund would do is to establish or to provide free internet access to all school children aged 5 to 21 during the pandemic. And this would be made possible by a small assessment on the broadband providers.
So this is very important legislation because even pre-pandemic, there were digital equity issues. The pandemic simply highlighted them, as we have discussed. So we cannot believe that these equity issues were only pandemic dependent or contingent, and then after the pandemic, things will go back to normal. We don't want things to go back to normal. We want things to be better. We want to allow children to have all this access. So we continue to be concerned with the actual lack of broadband access in many communities. And even if it's low cost, some families just cannot afford these costs.
Absolutely. So the reason that this is so critical, those technology inequities that have existed, that the pandemic brought to light, we as New York State PTA are going to urge for very comprehensive action to see that all children and all families have access to that broadband. So it's not just a money issue, a financial issue, it's an access issue. Those rural communities do not have the ability to even bring the broadband in because it's not, the infrastructure doesn't exist in those communities. So part of what this legislation would do is to make sure that those access issues are removed and that broadband is brought to those communities, and so that the families in those communities do have that opportunity as well.
So in terms of what the PTA wants, we want comprehensive action, and this means addressing the issue not only from one channel but from all the sources that lead to this unequal or inequitable access and to technology and broadband access. So that's why we want to see all children and families have access to this.
Absolutely. So the asks that we have as New York State PTA are for us to advocate with our legislators to pass that eLearn fund, to pass that legislation, to please legislate for free broadband access for all low-income families and all families with school-aged children, regardless of family income. Those are the asks that we need to be advocating for. And the one thing that I would say too is when you are in the meetings with those legislators, what makes the biggest difference for them and what catches their attention and has them pay closer attention to what it is that you're asking for is to have personal stories. If you have a student who was home during the pandemic, talk to the legislator during the meeting about the experience that you had as a parent, as a family, with issues with access or with issues with remote learning or issues with some of the technology not working, and what that's going to mean for the continuity of learning for our students. If we, even though we are back to in-person learning, using those tech tools and having access to those tech tools from home is going to help establish that continuity of learning. It's going to help children be able to continue and keep that momentum that we have now established again, now that we're back to in-person learning. So those are the things that they need to know. Those are the stories that they need to hear. So if you have any questions before you meet with your legislators, please talk to your team leads, reach out to any of us at New York State PTA. Again, I am Amy Heisek, and I am wellness at nyspta.org. So I am the wellness coordinator for New York State PTA.
I'm Christina Arroyo, and I'm the juvenile protection specialist with juvenile protection at nyspta.org.
So reach out to us with any questions that you may have about what to say or how to say it. We definitely help walk you through that and talk to your team leads as well. Good luck and enjoy your meetings.